Now, our top story today, protests continue throughout the Middle East. Now, we want to focus specifically on just a few countries, why the protests are taking place, what the people want, what the governments want, and of course, what the results will be. Now, it seems like the entire region is in flux right now. Let's start with Iraq. 3 people were reportedly killed, dozens injured during clashes between protesters and security forces in the southern city of Kut. Now, of course, this is something of great concern to the United States, considering how much is riding here on maintaining stability in Iraq. Now, protesters there were demanding the removal of corrupt officials, and they just wanted basic services in the country to be improved. Now, here you see them, they're throwing rocks and bricks at Iraqi security forces, and apparently they even took over the city's provincial and government buildings today. Now let's take a look at the island state of Bahrain. This is a crucial ally to the United States. In fact, the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet is there, as well as, of course, those major oil interests. Now, protesters have occupied a central square camping out there, pretty much emulating the events that took place in Tahrir Square in Egypt. And, of course, in Bahrain, there's discontent among the majority Shia population against the Sunni dynasty, which is the ruling power there. And, of course, economic hardship, political strife, all adding fuel to the fire. Now let's move north now to Iran. Protests here were organized by Iran's 2 main opposition leaders. Now the demonstrations left 2 people dead, others injured. The folks on the streets say they went out in support of all this unrest in neighboring countries. And of course, we can't forget about Tunisia and Egypt, which is where all of this started. In Tunisia, things not settling down there either, despite Ben Ali's decision to step down. And looks like labor strikes are also continuing in Egypt. So, of course, the million-dollar question is, what happens next? Well, for more, author and researcher Adrian Salbuchi is talking to us from Buenos Aires, Argentina. Adrian, good to see you. So I want to pose that question to you. Unrest throughout this whole region. What happens next, let's say in Bahrain or Yemen or even Libya, where we're seeing protests as well?
Well, I think that we have to do a double reading about this. On the one side, we definitely do have the peoples of different countries, of Bahrain, of Iran, definitely of Iraq, of Libya, of Yemen, of Egypt. We've seen it in the last month, who really want to have change. Now, the other aspect that I think we have to be very careful about is that this will be, and I think it is probably being, either macro-managed and controlled even, and probably is going to be used to favor the interests of certain global power structures. And here I believe that we have to be very careful and adjust our paradigm to the 21st century. It's not so much the United States taking advantage or not taking advantage or being concerned or not being concerned. We have to think in terms of a global power structure that operates inside the United States mainly, but is not a part of the United States even, and definitely does not go in favor of the national interest of the United States. We have to stop thinking in terms of binary, black and white, 0 and 1, so to speak.
But I do want to touch upon U.S. reaction here, because when it comes to Iran, for example, it seems like, the administration is all but encouraging these protesters to take to the streets. And, let's not forget, back in 2009, Obama was heavily criticized by the right for not being supportive enough in his rhetoric of these protesters. So let's listen to what he had to say this time around. Listen to Barack Obama.
My hope and expectation is that we're going to continue to see the people of Iran have the courage to be able to express their yearning for greater freedoms and a more representative government.
And then on the other side, you have Bahrain, which, let's not forget, is home to the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet, where Obama is urging the king to address the demands of the people. Talk about the difference here in response and reaction on the part of the U.S. government.
Well, no doubt the United States would like to see regime change in Iran, but at the same time they would like to see no regime change in Bahrain. And in Egypt, they probably knew that regime change was on the way because of the age of Hosni Mubarak. And, well, Iraq is another problem altogether. So I think that we have a generalized situation which the United States, the State Department, is finding very difficult to control. But again, I think that above the United States, above the White House and the State Department, we have to think in terms of the global planning being carried out by the global power elite, particularly the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderberg Group.
Well, I want you to elaborate on that. Well, what exactly do you mean by that? I mean, you're dropping these sort of hints of all these different groups involved.
Yes, very simple. We are seeing on a planetary basis, on a worldwide basis, how the global power elite is closing the stage of globalization that's been on for the last 20 years, and they are moving on to formal world government. And in that former world government, even the United States has to become weakened in relative terms, just as globalization required for the demise of the former Soviet Union. So in a way, we are seeing the United States also under attack by these global power elites who probably need a more generalized turmoil in the Middle East, because every time there is turmoil, it is a good opportunity to take advantage, not for the United States, perhaps not for any specific Western country, but for the global power elites' long-term interest. And you can find out much more about those if you look at what the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, and the Royal Institute of International Affairs in London are saying, than listening perhaps too much to the White House and to the State Department.
That's an interesting point, certainly an alternative point of view. But let's talk about Egypt here in the morning after. You know, they got Mubarak out, so that was a success for the demonstrators. But what now? Because, you know, getting rid of a dictator doesn't necessarily mean that they can suddenly find jobs or even put food on the table. And that's what we're seeing now. We're still seeing labor unrest and on all these economic problems. They're not going away.
Well, here perhaps I can bring something to the table, because speaking from South America, from Argentina, we have gone through a lot of these processes with military coups and so forth. And when I hear the Egyptians craving for democracy, quote-unquote democracy, it sends a chill down my spine, because as an Argentine citizen, we were also thrust into democracy 27, 28 years ago, and then only to discover that, in a way, modern democracy, the way it is formed nowadays, even in the United States, is the way the global money power has of controlling a country through money power. So in a way, if Egypt is now transitioning to so-called democracy, it will probably mean, and that's why I'm so scared about this 6-month transition, that they will probably find a way of putting in power those people who will act as the CEO of Egypt, just as Argentina's president acts as the CEO of Argentina. And they all answer to and report to a global power structure.
Adrian, I want to also briefly talk about how Europe is affected by all of this, because international migration officials have raised a lot of fears about mass migration. This unrest, apparently more than 5,000 Tunisians have already arrived in Italy. Some have been arrested. Italian Interior Minister Roberto Moroni has urged the EU to take strong action. He calls this a quote-unquote biblical exodus. Bring that into the conversation.
Absolutely. Europe probably has the weakest relative position of all, because now history is smacking Europe back in the face. They were all colonial powers in the Middle East and in Africa and elsewhere, and now these people who were former colonies of European countries now feel that they have a right, and in a way they do, of going to Europe. And Europe in relative and even geopolitical terms is very weak vis-a-vis what is happening in the Middle East and what is happening elsewhere in the world.
Author and researcher Adrian Salbuchi, thanks so much for your analysis today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.